Welcome, my name is Hasard. I'm a fighter pilot for the Air Force. I'm excited today to dig into the trailer for the new Top Gun 2 or Top Gun Maverick movie. It's a movie that is something that I'm excited to go see. I remember watching the first one 30 years ago, and it's one of the reasons why I became a fighter pilot. I know I'm not alone. There are a lot of other fighter pilots whose primary reason for becoming a fighter pilot was Top Gun, which is pretty crazy to think about. I had a chance to watch the movie about 6 months ago for the first time in a decade, and I think it still holds up. I think it's a great movie. It's entertaining. Obviously, there's some scenes that are not realistic at all, but as long as you look at it as an entertaining movie and not some hyper-realistic documentary, then I think pretty much everybody can get on board. Before we get started, I'm going to be giving away the patch that I fly with. So in order to win this, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll be releasing a video next week on how to win it. All right, let's get into the trailer. All right, F-14 right there. The only country right now that flies the F-14 is Iran. So we put a lot of our equipment in Tucson at Davis-Monthan. We mothball it, put it out in the desert in case we need to use it for a future war or for spare parts. So I'm curious where they got the F-14. This doesn't look like an Iranian one, so looks like they probably got it out of storage.
Your instructor is one of the finest pilots this program has ever produced.
Nice, you can tell that's a Super Hornet right there based on the angled intakes. A lot of people ask me, what happens when you go upside down like that? Does all the stuff in your cockpit go and hit the window? The answer for the most part is that we're under 1G the entire time. So we're applying backstick pressure. I don't know if you've had a chance to see some of the viral videos out there. Usually it's like a Wizzo in the back seat of a fighter who is pouring out water into a cup while the pilot does a barrel roll like that. As long as you apply some backstick pressure, then the body can't tell that you are going upside down. Unless you bunt forward, in which case all that stuff will go in and hit the top of your canopy. Gotta have a motorcycle on Top Gun.
His exploits are legendary.
All right, that looked like some awesome low-level flying. We've kind of transitioned from a low-altitude Air Force to a medium-altitude Air Force, but we still go out and fly low levels, and that's really where you get that sense of speed. It's really incredible to be flying 500 feet above the ground at over 500 miles an hour. It's really something that is hard to describe, and they're lower there. So sometimes we'll be clear down to 300 and occasionally 100 feet. And at those altitudes, you really can't do anything tactically. You're just focused on not running into the ground. If you so much as sneeze, you might hit the ground. We use something called a time to die chart, and it shows based on the bank angle and the altitude how quickly you can run into the ground. And in some cases, it's just a second or two. And so that determines how quickly our cross-check needs to be, where we're assessing the airspeed, the altitude, where the enemy is, where we're headed to. But for the most part, we don't fly too low like that, although that is a ton of fun.
What he has to teach you.
All right, so it looks like they are doing a flight brief. Now, the Navy might be different than the Air Force. They do a lot of weird things, but in the Air Force, we would not do this. Because we're probably going to be talking about classified information, we would be in a vault, a secure area. We'd also only have the minimum number of people possible for the brief. You really want to keep brief sizes small so that people have time to ask the questions that they need to ask. You also don't want to waste people's time. So you're not going to have a maintainer that's sitting in a flight brief. It's going to waste the maintainer's time.
May very well mean the difference between life and death.
I'm not sure why they are in their flight gear. Again, the Navy does some weird things, but dehydration is a big issue flying fighters. So we'll pull up to 9 Gs or 9 times the force of gravity. And problem is, if you are 3% dehydrated, it reduces your G tolerance time by 50%. So it can have a significant effect on your ability to handle Gs. And unfortunately in the F-16, we lost 17 pilots, so they died from a G-lock between 2001 and 2014. And we now have some software that can kind of help. It's called Auto GCAS, Auto Ground Collision Avoidance System, that can pull you up out of a dive if it thinks you're unconscious and you're going to hit the ground. But still, pulling G's is a big deal, and staying hydrated is a big part of that. And wearing your gear and sweating like that for the hours leading up to your flight is not something that you want to be doing. Of course, the hit the brakes, fly right by scene. This is a classic from the original Top Gun. Now, two things about this. One, we call this a reversal. So you are trying to pull to your adversary's 6, but typically we're not going to be this close. So in training, we have what are called training rules. And so we set a bubble around the other fighter. Usually it's about 500 to 1,000 feet. This looks like it's 50 feet right there. So we have that bubble because we're doing heavy maneuvering, and it's real easy to run jets together. So we stay outside of that bubble. Additionally, the hit the brakes scene like this, it's never going to work like this because you are fighting an adversary that is thinking as well. So if you are in trail like that and you see somebody that hits the brakes, hit the speed brakes, and goes to idle, then you're going to do the same thing. Maybe it's going to take a quarter of a second, half a second to react. So the range may decrease a little bit, but you're never going to see something this heinous unless you're just flying out to the airspace and your wingman just decides to pull to your high 6. But looks awesome in the movie. I heard that none of it was CGI, so I guess they did this real world. And you can really see how quickly these aircraft can maneuver.
Your reputation precedes you.
I have to admit, I wasn't expecting an invitation back.
They're called orders, Maverick.
This might be the most realistic scene of the trailer. So in the Air Force, the needs of the Air Force comes first. The way we get assigned fighters is based on your performance and pilot training, but the number of fighters that are available for a drop depends on what the Air Force needs. So when I started pilot training, there was only one person per class that was getting a fighter. And by the time I graduated, it was about 3 people per class out of 30. And it's since moved. It's swung in the opposite direction where a whole bunch of people are getting fighters. So it's constantly moving. And then same thing from PCSing or transferring bases. So we transfer bases about every 3 years, and whatever jobs the Air Force needs shows up on our VML, and then we will select what we want. And then based on your ranking at the base will determine what job that you get. And there's some years where times are tough where only the top 1 or 2 people get to stay in a fighter. The rest have to go to a ground tour or they have to go back to pilot training. And other years where it's really good and everybody gets to stay in the jet, or you get to go on an exchange, or in my case, I really wanted to go to the F-35, got a chance to do that at the what I consider the best base. So it really just depends on the needs of the Air Force. They are in charge and you're there to support what they need. Okay, there's Afterburner right there. I had a few questions on what is Afterburner. So the engines that we have, they're low bypass turbofans, similar to an airliner. It's a little bit different, but similar. And then we have an afterburner or augmenter on the back of those engines. And those augmenters, they have spray bars in them because the turbine only burns about half the oxygen out of the air. So there's still a bunch of oxygen. So we will spray fuel into that exhaust and ignite it. And we get a tremendous amount of thrust out of it. It also burns fuel very inefficiently. In the F-16, we only carried 7,000 pounds of fuel. And I remember when I was going Mach 1.9 over the South China Sea, looking down and seeing the fuel flow was 50,000 pounds an hour. So you only have a few minutes in Afterburner, but it does give you that thrust that you need, especially taking off and then doing some heavy maneuvering.
Good morning, aviators. This is your captain speaking. Today's exercise is dogfight.
All right, flying in close formation. We'll fly in close formation usually only 2 times. So one of them is going to be flying back up initial. So when we're coming back to the base, we fly up initial, and we'll be in close formation so that we can pitch out into the break and land quickly. We can get a lot of jets back to the base. Also, we'll fly close when we're having radar issues and we're going through the weather. So typically we want to be in trail just using our radar. But if that fails, then we do the old school method of closing in on our flight lead, 3 feet of wingtip clearance, and you're flying through the weather until you can see the runway. But in a tactical formation, VFRs, great weather out here, you're not going to want your wingman that close because it degrades their SA. They have to spend 100% of their situational awareness maintaining formation on you, not hitting you. If you kick your wingman out, now they can spend time looking at their radar, monitoring the radio calls, and setting up their cockpit for whatever they're going to do next.
2 versus 1? He's got to be kidding.
All right, so we talked to the most realistic scene in Top Gun 2. This is probably the most unrealistic scene. So they're in training. When we're in training, we want to make sure that everybody's ready for the next engagement. So we'll say 1's ready, 2's ready, adversary's ready, fight's on, and then that's when we're ready to go. So you're never going to see somebody just attack out of the blue like that when the other formation isn't ready. Additionally, like we talked to, they're probably not going to be that close. And lastly, Maverick probably has about 500 knots of closure here, going through a tight area that's only about 20 feet. If the number 2 guy right there is closing on the flight lead, then that's going to put Maverick in a square corner and he's going to impact the other aircraft. And there's nothing that's going to be left with a collision that bad. So this is probably the most unrealistic scene right here. They probably did it real world, but we would never just have a fights on like that. That's definitely not safe. Also, that goes back to the bubble, the 500-foot bubble that we never impede on. You're just setting yourself up for a midair like this. All right, that was cool right there. You can see the vortices coming from the wing root. So it's probably low on energy right here, or it's a humid day. So when you're high on energy and you pull G, you're not gonna really see those vortices. When the energy decreases, you're gonna start to see vortices on the wing tips, and they're gonna propagate towards the wing root. So he's probably, I would guess, about 300 knots before he pulls inverted and does a max performance pull. And then you can see those vortices coming off the jet. First volleyball.
Smoke in the air! Right.
All right, so not sure what's going on here. Looks like he's in some sort of next generation fighter that goes fast and goes high. So anytime you're above 50,000 feet, then typically you have to wear a pressure suit. I did a video on why we wear masks and why our typical altitude limit is 50,000 feet, because you can get the bends very quickly if you have a rapid decompression above 50,000 feet. That's something that scuba divers deal with, where the gases are coming out of solution in your blood really quickly and can cause a whole bunch of problems. Additionally, if you have a depressurization, then you can become hypoxic very quickly. So that's why you have to wear a spacesuit or pressure suit. Not sure what's going on in here, but you can see it looks like they have a heads-up display in there. That's what we have in the F-35, a HMD helmet-mounted display, and all our data is pumped in there as opposed to the traditional method of having a heads-up display that is attached to the aircraft. So there you go. This movie looks awesome. I'm excited to go see it. Let me know in the comments what you think. Again, I'm going to be giving away the patch that I fly with, so make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, make sure to like this video if you did, and I'll talk to you next time.